Thank you for listening to this fantastic show on the Crawlspace Media Network.
We want to talk to you about another show on the Crawlspace Media Network.
There are thousands of missing person cases in the United States, but few have captured the attention, imagination, and passion that Maura Murray's 2004 disappearance has. It was even the subject of the Oxygen Network's 6-part series, The Disappearance of Maura Murray.
And Tim, no one knows this better than you and I because we started working on a documentary about Maura Murray in 2013, and this was an exploration into the fascinating world of citizen detecting. We started the podcast 2 years later and soon realized that we could do more in bringing answers to Maura's case as well as other cold cases.
That's right, and the Maura Murray case has raised many ethical and social questions. How do we, as true crime media, interact with law enforcement, family and friends of victims, potential persons of interest?
And how do we know when we've crossed that ever-elusive line between ethics and entertainment? These are the issues that we deal with.
So join us for the journey that is the Missing Maura Murray podcast. We started it in 2015. There are over 100 episodes on the disappearance of Maura Murray. We traveled to the site of her disappearance. We received actual threats. We hiked a mountain, and we head to Canada with an obsessed journalist.
So listen as the show grows and matures with support from a network of peers in the true crime arena.
Listen to Missing Maura Murray on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victim's advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome back to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we are continuing our conversation with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas, talking about his advocacy work on the part of his sister, Cathy Thomas, her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski, and the other victims of the Colonial Parkway Murders here in Virginia. Bill, we were talking last time about the requests, although maybe request wasn't quite what you wanted it to be, that you made of the FBI with regard to your sister's case. And what was law enforcement response when you basically handed them a list of items and said, this is what I want out of you in my sister's case moving forward?
Well, we made it very much what we want. And so we were doing our best to coordinate the input from the 8 families in the Colonial Parkway Murders. Now, I'm less involved in the 4 murders, the 2 double homicides that are handled by the Virginia State Police, because my sister's case is an FBI case. The Robin Edwards, David Knobling, and Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer cases, which are handled by the Virginia State Police, we tried to coordinate with those families as well, so we were kind of offering a unified front. Now, on the FBI side, we actually got some very good response to our requests. A.J. Turner, who was the special agent in charge at that time, put an agent named Crosby Brackett, which I always thought was a great cop name.
Yeah.
And Crosby Brackett was a really, really fine detective who coincidentally was from my family's hometown, which is Lowell, Massachusetts. Even though he was significantly younger than I am, he had grown up just a few blocks away from my parents' house in the Belvedere section of Lowell. And so he knew our street and he knew our house. And so it was an interesting connection. And I remember the first time I spoke to Crosby Brackett over the phone, he had this great Boston accent. And he had been a police officer in Lowell, Massachusetts, our hometown, and then had gone to the FBI Academy and become an FBI agent. And he handled our case for about 5 years and did a lot of outstanding work. He was responsible for sending in a lot of the evidence in the Colonial Parkway Murders into FBI Quantico to their crime lab for the retesting that we had asked for. They spaced that out. You can't send in everything at once. You know, he would send in certain items. He would determine the priority depending on where he thought the opportunities might be from a forensic perspective in consultation with his colleagues at Quantico. He was interviewing people and re-interviewing people and reaching out to the families. He did a very, very good job, and I'm a big admirer of Crosby Brackett's. And then we actually lobbied to have Crosby stay on for an extra year handling the Colonial Parkway murders. We weren't trying to damage the guy's career or anything, but they were going to transfer him to Washington, D.C. from the Newport News, Virginia office. And we thought he was doing such a great job, we actually asked that they extend his tour, which they did do. After that, a terrific FBI agent named Liza Ludovico took over the case. And although Liza would be annoyed to hear me mention her by name in this podcast, she's also done an outstanding job. And I think she's handled the case now for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't want to offend anyone who's worked on this case of the dozens of people who've worked on the Colonial Parkway murders, but I actually think Agent Ludovico is the best agent we ever had. She's an outstanding, thoughtful, methodical investigator. She's extremely smart, and she gets the nuances. I'm a big fan. She and I have butted heads behind closed doors plenty as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm not always proud of that. You know, I've lost my temper more than once, and I usually end up kind of unhappy with myself for allowing the frustration of the moment to get ahead of me. Liza's been great. She hasn't, to my knowledge, held that against me. She still takes my phone calls. And she's done a terrific job. And I think she's been handling our case now for about 5 years.
Yeah, it's got to be that. That's as long as you and I have worked together. So, yeah.
And
maybe it's longer than that, yeah.
It may be longer than that. It could be 6 years coming up this spring.
Yeah.
But I remember when she called and introduced herself, and I can't thank her enough for all the work that she's done. She prefers to stay in the background, and so she probably will be annoyed with me for mentioning her by name. But it is what it is.
And we did address last episode, we've mentioned the work that the media has done to help move this case forward and keep it in the spotlight. Are there any media partners that you want to highlight or give shout outs to? We've talked about Mike Mather already, who has been a terrific resource. Anyone else you want to shout out?
There are probably so many, and I hope that I don't overlook anyone. Another longtime television reporter in the market is a guy named Andy Fox.
Yes,
and Andy's one of the reporters who has been reporting on the Colonial Parkway murders since day one. Mm-hmm. He's stayed in Virginia, and he's a terrific reporter, and he has great contacts in law enforcement and throughout the so-called Tidewater region where the Parkway murders took place. He's been tremendous. And then we've gotten great response from the various newspaper reporters. Mike Holtzclaw, who is a longtime reporter for the Daily Press, has been outstanding. And there's so many others. The Washington Post has been incredibly generous in their coverage. And of course, they saw this as a regional story and one that they've stayed involved with. Back to the Daily Press for a moment. At the 30th anniversary of the start of the Colonial Parkway murders, so just a couple of years ago, the Daily Press did an incredible 8-part series, and I hope we can include the links in our show notes here.
Oh, yeah.
It's the single best reporting I think I've ever seen on the case. There's 2 versions, of course. They did 8-page one major feature stories 8 days in a row in the physical copy of the newspaper. And then there were 8 matching segments that were available online and still are, with hundreds of photographs from their archives because they'd covered the case for 30 years. I think I'm credited with pitching them on the story, but it was something that they just ran with, and it's just spectacular. It's so beautifully written and just thoughtfully reported, and then their photographers just went out of their way. They shot beautiful new photography of the 4 sites that are associated with each of the double homicides to give you an idea of the places where these murders took place, as well as going back and looking through their archives at photographs, some of which had never even run. You know, you always have a choice to make in terms of editorial decisions that editors back then would have made. Which picture are you going to run, that sort of thing. And so obviously the photographers shoot lots more than makes it into the paper and the online edition. And it was just amazing to see all of the work they did. I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole number of other people, but those are some of the ones that came to mind. And of course, now we have a television series that's going to be coming up on the Colonial Parkway Murders, which will be airing in February 2021, which isn't that far away now.
It's not that far away, I know.
It's coming up fast, and we'll have a lot more information about that. I've been working with XG Productions out of Los Angeles, Jim Clementi and Tim Clementi's company, and then they partnered with Texas Crew Productions out of Austin, Texas, and have produced a 4-part series they call The Lover's Lane Murders, and that will be airing on the Oxygen Network. And of course, we've been covered numerous times by all sorts of different programs, from 48 Hours to Dateline NBC and so on. We've had a number of different true crime television programs cover us as well.
For people who are looking to become advocates for their loved one's case, what are your recommendations for developing a media presence, or for getting the media to take notice of your case? Because as we know, there is a considerable love in this country for true crime, but there are still so many cases that not everything can get covered. Not everything will have the time, attention, and resources devoted to it that is necessary. So as somebody who has been doing this for quite a while now, what are the best pieces of advice that you could offer to people who are looking to advocate to move their case forward with the media's help?
It's something I've given a lot of thought to, and a lot of what I've learned has been through trial and error, especially over the last 11 years since I got more involved in the Colonial Parkway Murders. I think people have to understand that developing a relationship with media partners is not dissimilar to developing a relationship with your investigators. You have to understand that this is going to be a struggle. You actually are fighting for attention. As we talk about time, attention, and resources, there are 250,000 cold case murders currently in the United States. The close rate for murders, which was over 90% when I was a kid back in the 60s, is now dropping to the mid-60% range. So despite the fact that we have been led to believe by very entertaining programming on TV and so on, whether we're watching CSI or Criminal Minds or any of the law enforcement procedurals with their flashy graphics and DNA testing and cracking cases in 48 minutes. In other words, by the time you get back to the top of the hour, the criminal's in handcuffs and being crated off to prison somewhere to face trial. The truth is, our country has failed to address what is, I think, a pandemic of cold case homicides. You have to understand that you're going to be struggling. It's a fight. I mean, literally a fight to get attention from law enforcement, from prosecutors, from media, and you're really going to have to go in with a plan of attack. I don't mean to sound cynical at all, but over the last 11 years since I've gotten much more involved in the Colonial Parkway Murders, and then you and I have been working together for 6 years now?
6 years, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know you've seen this as well. There are hundreds, if not thousands of people that are desperate to try to figure out what happened to their loved ones, and they're trying to understand, what do I have to do to get some focus? We all have to remember there are 17,000 law enforcement agencies across the country, which is way too many. There's a real lack of coordination between those agencies, which is very unfortunate. And remember, terrible things happen every single week. Law enforcement and our law enforcement agencies are too small, and they're underfunded, and in my personal opinion, have spent money on the wrong things. They don't have enough resources to address cold case homicides and cold case sexual assaults. So you're going to be struggling. You're going to have to fight. Like I said, sometimes I've gotten a little too hot and pushed too hard. I've made plenty of mistakes. I hope I've learned from some of them. This is something that I try to explain to family members when they reach out to me. because they see that we've had some success with the Colonial Parkway murders. We've had resources put back into our case. We have the attention of the FBI. We've had newspaper stories and television stories and radio coverage and many, many podcasts and other reporting on the Colonial Parkway murders, in addition to you and I starting our own podcast. Mm-hmm. So they see that we've had some success, which I appreciate their kind words, but our case isn't solved.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing bad guys go off to prison to face trial. We're not there yet. We may be closer now than we've ever been before, but we still don't have the answers that we're seeking. But I do think it's very important that people understand that this is going to take a significant amount of time. You're going to have to take the long-term outlook. Mm-hmm. I know that with a number of different families, I've said to them that they have to understand that there's like a 40% chance that their loved one's homicide is not going to be solved, and that you should take the long-term outlook. We all love hearing these stories where perpetrators are identified as a result of testimony of witnesses or DNA evidence or what have you, and things get resolved. But that's not necessarily the case in many of these homicides. The thing that's very difficult for all of us to hear is that terrible things happen this week and next week and the week after that, and you can feel your loved one's case go cold. We lived it. That part is a real struggle. I don't have any magic answer here. I know that this is going to be very difficult. It's going to be a long slog. There's a very good chance that your loved one's case may take months or maybe even years to solve. And you're going to have to be in there, organized, aggressive, agitating for time, attention, and resources, that focus from law enforcement. And then you're going to have to be fighting for media attention. You know, there's a lot of different techniques that you can use. And your righteous anger, which I have plenty of, it can only take you so far. You've got to enlist partners. So when I talk to families, I don't have any simple answers. They're mostly long, complex answers like the one I'm in the middle of right now.
And I think you do have to face up to some hard truths, including the idea that it's entirely possible your case may end up being one of the ones that is never solved. And I know that that's something nobody wants to face. Other than solving Cathy's case, and of course the Colonial Parkway Murders case as a whole is what we're talking about, what other goals do you have as an advocate? We've had several that we've developed, just the two of us, over the year that we've been doing our podcast. What are some other goals, though, that you would like to see come about as a result of the work that we're doing here?
Remember, I think it's important to set big goals. Mm-hmm. I'd love to help solve the Colonial Parkway murders. And when we solve the Colonial Parkway murders, note the optimism.
Yep.
I would like to then shift our attention to America's 250,000 cold case homicides and probably a similar, at least 200,000, and that number's probably low, unsolved sexual assaults. Mm-hmm. So we've got 200,000 to 400,000 sexual assaults that could be resolved and probably 250,000 cold case homicides. There's a lot of work to be done. I'd like to shift our attention to that larger issue of this scourge of unsolved cold cases. I think about this stuff when I wake up first thing in the morning, and it's the last thing I think about before I go to bed. I mean, I just sort of dreamed up this idea a while back, which I know I've shared with you, which is personal opinion. I come from a military family, a Navy family, which I'm very proud of. But I'm also aware of the fact that I believe that America spends too much on the military. Mm-hmm. You know, when I've read that the American military budget is larger than the next 13 countries combined, including the people that are supposed to be our adversaries, like China and Russia and North Korea and people like that. We're spending too much money on America's military. And I say that as a son of a naval officer and someone who considers himself a proud part of a Navy family. Here's what I dreamt up. I'm not saying it's a fully baked cake here, but it's an idea. It seemed to me that a lot of military personnel, when they finish the end of their military careers, which are typically 20 or maybe 30 years max, because military for the most part is a younger person's vocation, A lot of them are interested in law enforcement. So, for example, they will finish their service careers, and then many of them become members of law enforcement. What if we were to take, let's just say, 100,000 of America's best and brightest from the military and offer them full-time, permanently funded positions in law enforcement? And their goal would be to cut the number of unsolved homicides in the United States in half in 10 years. So think of this as like President Kennedy's challenge to us when I was a kid that we were going to go to the moon in 10 years, which everybody thought was an audacious goal, but we actually achieved it.
Yeah.
And this happened when I was a young boy, and it was very inspiring. What if we did something like that, much in the same way that President-elect Biden's talking about cancer, solving cancer within a certain period of time as being like a moonshot kind of goal? Well, here's my law enforcement goal. So our job over a 10-year period, with the help of these 100,000 former military people, is to cut the number of homicides currently unsolved in half in 10 years. And so this would involve amazing opportunities in forensics, in science, in law enforcement, investigation. We would really put some money into law enforcement, not for more military-style vehicles on the streets of America, but actually solving at least 50% of these unsolved homicides. I think it's an achievable goal. Now, I recognize I'm just dreaming this stuff up, but I think I've heard worse ideas.
Yeah, there are more audacious schemes. And yeah, absolutely, I think it's possible.
I think it's something we could do. It's just like anything else, though. It requires a commitment on the part of everyone involved. Everyone in our society has to decide 250,000 cold case homicides is too many. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helps solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
Do you like our show, Mind Over Murder, and want to create your own podcast?
Well then, let us tell you about Anchor.
First of all, it's free. And who doesn't love free, right?
I like free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
You can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before.
Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more platforms.
And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership.
I like the sound of that. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Right here, Anchor.
Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started on your own podcast.
You can tell them Kristin and Bill from Mind Over Murder sent you. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. A lot of these cases, experts tell me, including the Colonial Parkway murders, are solvable cases if we put, here we go again, time, attention, and resources into those cases. They can be solved. And if we go back to the cold cases and take a look at them with 2021 science, as opposed to whatever the state of the art was back when those terrible things happened, this is where we'll catch repeat offenders, serial rapists, serial murderers. And it isn't necessarily critical that all of those cases go to prosecution, I hope people understand this, but as the brother of a murder victim, I'm actually, at this point, looking for answers more than I am prosecution. If a person or persons is identified in the Colonial Parkway murders, my attention might shift to, well, I believe this person should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But right now, and I think the other families feel somewhat similarly, we're just looking for answers. We just want to know why what happened. And then if we ever get to the who place, then maybe we'll begin to think about prosecution or can this person be found, that kind of thing. In my mind, a lot of this is just looking for answers. You and I have talked about this before, Kristin. I'm not a big believer in closure. I'm not terribly comfortable with that word. Other people are, and as I'm fond of saying, your mileage may vary. Just because Bill Thomas says something doesn't mean it's so. And just because I offer my point of view doesn't mean that, one of the other family members, the Phelps or Lauer family, they might feel completely different. And I totally respect that. Their viewpoint is just as valid as mine. I just happen to be the one who's tossing out ideas on this podcast.
You happen to be the one who's got the mic, literally.
Well, you and I went out and bought these microphones, so we figured we'd better use them.
So, Bill, I know your father passed recently, but you do still have your brothers, Richard and Jack. How did they feel about the work that you've done on Cathy's case? You've taken the mantle squarely on your shoulders. Have they wanted to be involved with the case? How have they felt about your work on her behalf?
Well, you touch on a couple of things there. Richard and Jack haven't wanted to be as directly involved. I totally respect that. In other words, one of the things I've learned in working with all of the Colonial Parkway murders victims' families is that everybody's going to handle the situation in their own way. So he or she, all of us, we're going to respond in terms of where we are in our lives and how we're feeling about this. Particularly in the last 11 years when I've been so involved with the case, people will kind of ebb and flow a little bit in terms of their level of involvement. And I get it. People will get burned out or just tired, or they find it too much of a burden, too downbeat, and that sort of thing, too frustrating. Or different things will be going on in their lives. I mean, I went through cancer treatment. Gosh, that's 6 years ago now. So I'm 6 years cancer free. But if you asked me 5 years ago, when I was heading into that very dark, probably year-long period where you're going through cancer treatment and recovering, I wasn't able to devote a significant amount of time to the Colonial Parkway murders. I was trying to get healthy, and it was a long slog. There was light at the end of the tunnel, but man, it was pretty dark in there for a while. And you worry about, am I going to die? Is this going to be the thing that ends my life? Now, fortunately, I got early treatment and detection and great care at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and so I'm able to talk about cancer in the past tense. Different things happen in people's lives, and they may have to step away from the Colonial Parkway murders, whether they do it in the short term or the long term, or it might just not be good for them just in terms of their heart and soul. Mm-hmm. They might need to step back, and I totally get it. I think my family's attitude towards my commitment to the Colonial Parkway murders has changed a lot. I think that they were very worried about me 11 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was very heavily involved in the Colonial Parkway murders. I think they thought it was unhealthy, and you'd hear words like obsessed and, stuck and things like that. It wasn't that they didn't want to see the case solved. They just thought it was becoming so all-consuming for me that it was too much. They might have been right, but I stuck with it. And interestingly, now we've made some significant strides in terms of the investigation, and I'm more hopeful now about the Colonial Parkway murders being resolved than I've ever been before. Over the course of that time, my family's kind of come around, and they've realized that we've done good work and that we've managed to advance the case, and they are more hopeful as well. So, for instance, my older brother, Richard, who was probably very concerned about me, he's a big brother after all, back 10 years ago, I think he was worried about me, and now he asks me about Cathy's case and how are you doing and what's the latest from the FBI and any word on the advanced forensic testing. And so he has a tendency to check in more. Richard is more involved and more engaged in Cathy's case and the Colonial Parkway murders than he might have been before. My younger brother, Jack, we still talk frequently, very rarely would go more than a week without talking. And when I talk to Jack, Jack wants to talk about other things. Now, he loves Cathy and is certainly quick to bring up her name, but he doesn't necessarily want to know the details of what's going on in terms of the investigation into her unsolved murder 34 years later. I think Jack would rather talk to me about other things. So I try to be respectful of where everybody's coming from, and I try to recognize that people's level of involvement will shift a bit at different times. We all contribute in the way that we can. I'm just a stubborn Irishman. You put something, you put that bit in my mouth, and I'm not going to let it go. But that's just me. I feel like over time my family has kind of come around and recognized that there's a lot of positives. Hope springs eternal, as my mom would say.
What does Chris know about your involvement with the case, and how does Chris feel about it? 'Cause I don't think we've ever mentioned, I'm sure he's aware of the case. What does he feel about your involvement with it?
Well, my son Chris is now post-college, and so he's a young professional. He's working in Boston. He knows a fair amount about the case. When he was a little kid, Valerie, my ex-wife, his mom, she tried to shield him from the circumstances of Cathy's death, completely understandably. She'd asked me to be careful about phone conversations and that kind of thing that could be overheard. And I understand it, yet Chris knows a fair amount. And for instance, his cousins, who were a bit older, they expressed a significant amount of frustration. This is my older brother Richard's sons, James and Ross, and their wives. They were very frustrated because they didn't know enough, they felt, about the Colonial Parkway murders. And so they've ended up following me on social media, and they ask me questions about the case. And again, I'm not criticizing anybody. That Richard, my brother, and my sister-in-law, Ann, they did what they thought was right 34 years ago when Cathy died and their kids were small. But of course, over the course of 34 years, now their kids are grown-ups, and they want to know more than they did way back when. Now, interestingly, we've got this television series coming up, The Lover's Lane Murders, that are going to cover the Colonial Parkway murders. I think the show is very well done and explores the case in a very interesting way. This would be a time where I can pretty much guarantee my brothers and my sister are going to ask me, should I watch the show? And I'm probably going to say no. But I think for other people that are interested in this show, and we've got thousands and thousands of people supporting us across the country, I hope they watch the show and enjoy it and learn something new about the case and begin to develop an even better understanding of these 8 wonderful young people whom we lost and what the depth of that loss means. And at the same time, see 3 really incredible investigators, Maureen O'Connell, Lonnie Coombs, and FBI profiler Jim Clemente, discuss the case in a really thoughtful way. And Jim Clemente does some amazing stuff where I don't think we've ever had a nonfiction show focus on a FBI profiler in this way, where you get to see how Jim's profiler brain works. It's very, very interesting to see.
Really compelling.
Yeah. So I think for most people, I think they will find the show fascinating and of great interest. And I think they'll develop a better understanding of the case and the people we lost and where the opportunities may lie for developing suspects and so on.
And there have been times when we have had people on our social media pages reach out and ask, do you have the crime scene photos? Can I see the crime scene photos? We really can't express to you how bad of an idea it is to look at these sorts of things. I mean, it goes doubly for Bill because they're his sister. I have seen the worst ones, and they're awful, and they're things that I will never be able to unsee. If you don't have to look at crime scene photos, we urge you not to. They are, the really graphic ones they're awful. And it is very, I know that we've talked about this before on one of the, the groups that you moderate on Facebook, that there are some families who are okay with crime scene photos, including very graphic ones, being out there for public consumption. But I know, have always felt that we don't want our crime scene photos out there. We don't want the crime scene photos from the Parkway case out there. And to the best of our knowledge, they are not. They are not on the internet anywhere that we've been able to find. I mean, other than one or two overalls, the really graphic ones are not out there. We've had people who have asked, can we send it to them? Can we tell them where it is? The answer is no, we can't. And even if we could, we wouldn't.
No, and I have to remind myself to be polite when I say, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, we understand that around this kind of material, there's a lot of curiosity around this type of material. There is a lot of interest. Maybe some of it delves into prurient interest, depending on who you are. But it's always a little weird for us when we get a response on the page or a request on the page. Can you show us the photos, send us the photos, do whatever? The answer for us is always going to be no, we can't and we won't. It's just not something that you want embedded on the inside of your brain.
By the way, it's coming up on a year since we went out and bought our microphones and said, let's do a podcast.
I know it is a year that has felt in some ways like 10 years. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. I know we're going to cross 50 episodes here fairly soon.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
Probably by the time this episode airs in a couple of weeks, we'll be very close to our first year. I would say Mind Over Murder and doing this podcast with you is one of the good things that came out of 2020. Agreed. Not the best year we've ever had, certainly. And I think 2021 is going to be even better.
And the amount of, really, I'm just saying this one for the benefit of our listeners here. The amount of backstory here on the Colonial Parkway Murders and Bill's work on it is big enough for a book, which he is writing.
Yes, I am.
Which he is writing, and which I am also trying to do one, but full-time teacher, I'm not having a lot of luck with that. It has been my privilege over the last 6 years to work with Bill and with Joyce and Chris Call and the Haley family and all of the other members of the Colonial Parkway Murders victims' families. And they are all amazing, wonderful people who are advocating very strongly to keep this case in the media and to keep it, in the forefront so that it can be solved. Bill, I think at this point, that I admire the hell out of you, but in case I haven't said it, and in case our listeners don't realize it, I admire the hell out of you for the work that you do and for the way that you try and the effort that you put every day into thinking about it when you wake up, thinking about it when you go to sleep. It has been a privilege over the last 6 years to get involved in this case in this way. I've told you that I grew up here locally hearing about the case, but you don't really, it's one thing to hear about it and another thing to know it, to internalize it, to know the names of the victims, to see their faces and to talk to the people who loved them so much. And it's been a real honor getting to work on this case with you and getting to do this podcast. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, thank you. And I can't thank you enough for this partnership and all the things that you've done to contribute to moving this case forward. I know we had a chance when we were shooting the television show, The Lover's Lane Murders, we had a chance to see each other. This is all pre-COVID. It's amazing. We finished all that stuff just a couple of months before the pandemic hit. But I know that my family appreciates and all the other families appreciate all that you've done for them because you come along and, you have no direct reason other than the goodness of your heart to be involved in and concerned about these people that initially you'd never even met. And yet you've ended up being an incredible advocate for all of us, and we very much appreciate it. There's something I wanted to say, too, when I was listening to our conversation just now. I think sometimes people have a perception of me that I am so super serious and that... And one of the things you and I have tried to do with Mind Over Murder is to have some light moments and to laugh a bit and to, joke. And we leave those things in because I think they're very important. The one thing I worry about sometimes, particularly when people, if they read my writing or my responses on social media or what have you, I worry that they think that my life is completely consumed by the Colonial Parkway murders and losing my sister. And even though it's incredibly important to me, obviously, and I've put in a significant amount of time, as have you, I do want people to understand that I have a very joyful life. I have a happy life. I'm in a wonderful relationship with Pamela Arnois, who's an artist whose beautiful art studio is 2 floors above me here in our old house. And, I have a wonderful son, Chris, and a great relationship with my family and my older brother and younger brother. And we discovered that we had a half-sister we didn't know anything about, Stephanie. Thank you, Ancestry.com. Here we are again with DNA testing. So I do want people to understand that, yes, the Colonial Parkway murders are sometimes a burden, and they're obviously incredibly important to us, and we're working hard to help, move the case forward. But I do want people to understand that there's a lot of joy in my life and that I hope there's some balance there and that it is sometimes difficult to achieve, but there's plenty of good and light and happiness to offset. I'm doing a balancing thing here with my hands, which you can't see because it's a podcast. But I think that's very important to understand that, it's not all gloom and doom. And the burden of losing a loved one in this way does become easier somewhat with time. I don't think it ever goes away. And none of us want to lose our loved ones in such a fashion. I think we all hope that we'll live long and happy lives and that we'll die when we're 90 years old in our sleep, and with a smile on our face. And that would be perfect, but that isn't the world we live in. But I do want people to understand that it's not all, gloom and doom at Bill Thomas's house.
For sure. And I mean, take it from someone, Bill and I talk on the phone regularly, like multiple times a week, 3-4 times a week mainly. And we are just as likely to sit and talk about Oliver stories, Oliver being Bill's wonderful, adorable long-haired dachshund, or Ziggy stories on my end, as we are to talk about like the newest thing that we've heard about DNA testing. There is a lot that is joyful and good that is part of our conversation. So take it from someone who keeps up with Bill on the regular. Yeah. He's telling the truth. He isn't just pontificating for the pod. This is for sure. Bill does actually have a very interesting and fun life. We've been hoping, and then the pandemic happened, that we were going to spend a whole lot more time together now that we're on the same coast. When we started this partnership, Bill was in Los Angeles and I was here, and we were having to make do with phone calls. We weren't even doing Zoom or Skype or anything like that. We were just phone calls.
I don't think Zoom had even been invented.
Probably not. 2015, probably it hadn't been.
I don't know. Zoom is now like part of our daily lives.
Seriously. I feel like we're going to one of these days have a Zoom interface just kind of tattooed into, forehead or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But when Bill and I started this partnership, we did eventually we had the hope that we were going to be able to see each other. I was going to go up to his wonderful maple house in beautiful Norfolk, Connecticut, that he was going to spend time down here in Williamsburg. And the pandemic happened and it never got off the ground.
That will happen.
It will happen. A vaccine is forthcoming, and I'm hoping that as an educator, I'll be able to get it sooner rather than later. So, that'll take care of my part.
This is true. Imagine being able to see your students live and in person. Man, we'll get there.
We'll get there one of these days. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Mind Over Murder. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the life of a victim's advocate with Bill Thomas. And if you have questions for Bill, please feel free to hit him up on any of our social pages. We're happy to answer those questions anytime. Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.